Are you tired of your podcast feeling like just another thing on your to-do list? We can fix it. I'm Stacey Harris, and at Uncommonly More, we turn podcasts into sustainable sales assets that actually work for your business even long after your release date has passed. Whether you're launching a new show or leveling up an existing one, my podcast strategy intensive gives you a clear plan to make your podcast a tool that drives sales results. You'll walk away with a 12-week content plan, actionable steps, and the confidence to make it happen. Plus, you'll have 30 days of email access to me to get any questions answered that come up. Visit uncommonlymore.com/intensive to book your intensive today, and let's build a podcast that works as hard as you do. If you have struggled with your podcast, even as a veteran or an experienced podcaster, I want you to hear this conversation today. I am joined by client and friend Nicole Otchy to talk about her new podcast, to talk about her old podcast, talk about visibility and how she uses it in her business. Let's get into it. Welcome to the More Profitable Podcast with Stacey Harris. I'm Stacey, and this is the spot to learn more about the strategies, tactics, and tools you need to build your more profitable podcast. My team and I work every day with podcasters like you to shift shows from frustrating time sucks to productive members of your sales team, because your show should be built to generate and convert leads. So let's get into it. You know, I don't invite people onto the show very often. And when I do, they are people who can provide you real, actual value. And that is certainly how I would describe the conversation I'm going to share with you today with friend and client Nicole Otchy. Nicole is a business consultant for stylists, personal stylists. She has an incredible podcast that we just launched earlier this year called the Six Figure Personal Stylist Podcast. It is a fantastic show. It is a strategically built show, and it is already, just a handful of episodes in, a very effective business asset. And that's what we're going to talk about today. She's also going to share some really great stuff about visibility, about how working with us in different ways has been helpful. She's a unique case in the sense that I haven't had anybody on the show before who has done every one of my offerings. The first time we worked together, she did an intensive. She joined us for the very first round of the Profitable Podcaster Mastermind, and she now works with us in a full production contract. So you kind of get a feel for what does working with someone in these different ways deliver. So I'm super stoked to get into this conversation. Again, thank you, Nicole, for joining me. Thank you for listening. And be sure to reach out and let me know what your takeaways are, because I cannot wait to hear what you think of my chat with Nicole. Awesome. I'm really excited that you're here with me today, Nicole. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I have shared, of course, how awesome you are, but I always like, especially for you, because your sort of business journey has been unique in the sense that you now essentially teach what you used to do, which I find is very rare in coaches, and I like to see it.
Thank you.
So let's start with you telling me a little bit about you and sort of your business trajectory. How did we get here?
Sure. So I was a personal stylist for 14 years, in person and virtual in 3 major cities. And that's actually when I met Stacey. I was a personal stylist. And then I was always on the side training and mentoring stylists since probably my 3rd year as a stylist. But it just wasn't something I talked about publicly. Like I would take 2 to 3 clients a year on and off, or I'd do one-off calls. And then I knew I was kind of at a crossroads where I didn't want to be a stylist anymore. Like I was just didn't appeal to me after almost 15 years. And it was time for something new. And at that time, I started to get more inquiries about helping, other stylists with their business model. So I kind of just leaned into it to see how it would go. And it took off pretty quickly. So I ended up closing the styling business and then officially launching the styling consultancy, a business consulting firm for personal stylists, in April of 2023.
That's awesome. You had a podcast for your first business too, for the styling business too, right?
I did. And there's really no comparison thanks to you. I was just I'm not going to bury the lead here, friends. I wouldn't do it the way I did it before.
How did you use your podcast in its first iteration for the styling business? Were you using it in the way you're using it now as sort of a sales asset, or was it just sort of a thing that existed?
So I thought I was. I think like all business owners like thought I was, but there was very little strategy, nor did I have any idea that like there should be. I was talking about topics that were relevant to my clients. I wasn't like trying to get sponsorship or do something else with it. So in that sense, I think from the outside, people would say it like is similar. Like I've actually had a lot of stylists listen to that podcast and then seek me out. So it has been also an asset, an unexpected, very unexpected sales asset. I wouldn't say it's the best one because it doesn't have like good calls to action. It wasn't like related to specific services. Like there was no real business and sales strategy, which was the problem. It was just like, oh crap, what am I going to talk about this week? And then it would like go off to an, editor who would just kind of edit it. And then I would have to do all of the rest of it myself, which meant that sometimes not only was there no strategy behind when things were coming out and why things were coming out, it was really hard to keep up with the promotion of it because I had to do everything except for the literal editing of the show, which, they were like 30 minutes. And so like, yeah, every other piece of it was on my plate. And there were weeks where if I had clients, like it just wasn't going well. It wasn't being promoted. It wasn't getting completed. It was going out, but it wasn't, acting as like a true sales asset. So that was a bit of a problem.
I love that you bring that up though, because I think a lot of us have had that experience where we're kind of going through the motions of having a podcast that supports our business, but there's these fundamental elements that are missing. And because we're trying to DIY it, because we're doing it all in addition to, delivering services and like working, like it becomes just one more thing. And so then it becomes about checking the content box instead of building content that supports moving your business forward. And you sort of end up in this loop where you're like, I'm trying really hard. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do for this podcast, but it doesn't actually work. And that's where we get to like pod fade and burnout because we're like, this is too hard to not work.
Yeah. And like what I'll say too is first of all, I didn't even know people that produced podcasts. I didn't know there were people like I didn't know there was this way of looking at podcasts until I met you. I'm sure that there were, but I didn't know it. The people that I had hired weren't doing that. And I think that to be honest and like even broader in this conversation, because I think that what I've learned from you it really trickled over to all of my marketing and all of my messaging and all of the ways that I handle how I promote my business, which is that like, it should be an asset for your business. And assets aren't something that are reactive. They're something that are proactive because not only are you selling, but you're building a relationship. And what we fail to understand because we're so busy and because sometimes people don't tell us or because we're not following the people that could tell us, honestly, is that when you are coming from a place of, oh crap, I have to check the content box, you are not only leaving so much money on the table, but it just brings an energy to your business that's crappy. And people can feel that, which is why I'm still amazed, honestly, that people listen to the old podcast and are like, I think I want to hire this woman. Because I know that nobody knows what's going on in my head, but it was so scattered. And while I did know my industry well, which I think is true of so many people that have a podcast, they know their industry. But knowing your industry and knowing how to sell people into your expertise are like totally different. And thanks to Stacey, I look at all of my marketing differently. And yes, the podcast is like the key part of that, but all of it.
It's funny how often our clients say that the quarterly strategy calls have become sort of like their marketing marker now. Like they're like, oh, I know I'm going to have to get on this call with Stacey in June. So I need to make these decisions about Q2 or about Q3 rather, because Stacey's going to ask me what we're doing and I need to know. And so it's interesting how when you strategically invest your time in one place, you really do get to reap the benefits in a lot of parts of your business, even if my team and I or whoever you're working with never actually touches those parts of your business, because it really shifts your approach to them. I love the language you used around like shifting from reactive to proactive, because that is such a different energy. And one of the things I love about podcasts is I invite the leads that I am educating into a decision to spend some time with me. And I want that to come from a place of like, this is exciting and this is what it's like to work together. And this is how, this is how we move forward, and not of the energy of like, well, I just need to check the content box. This literally just needs to go out, because no one's going to respond to that positively. No one's going to be sort of like fired up and excited. Nobody's going to move into action when they're sitting in the energy of you dreading the action you're taking.
And if they are, there might not be a great client. Like,
that's true.
That's another thing is that, like, yeah, some people will, but might not be the client you want. And what it's done for me on so many levels, though, is absolutely it's the accountability of knowing every quarter I got to be like, this is what I'm thinking, and this is. But also, just for the record, Stacey is an exceptional strategist. Like, I've had a lot of business coaches, a lot of strategists in my career, hired probably over $300,000 worth of them, not even including the investment for the podcast. And by far, she's one of the smartest people I know, like, just to be honest. And I'm not just saying that, like, it's true. I mean, she could be a great podcast producer and not be the level of strategist she is. So it's like a gift on every level. But what I will say is that, like, just that accountability for certain people, myself included, and certain people that have a motivation style that they do better being accountable, which is a real motivation style, it will make you be better at your business, even if the person you're talking to, like, isn't as great as Stacey, and she's amazing. So I feel like I'm getting like 1,000 gifts every month when I get all my, 4 full podcasts that are produced, assets for my marketing. And what's wild is that how much space it gives me to be better at the relationship that I'm trying to create with the listener, because it is such an intimate relationship. And I really don't think with my first podcast, I got it. I don't think I fully got it.
No, honestly, I think that realization, I think I witnessed that realization because the first way we kind of worked together, although I think we did some consulting-y tech stuff with your first show, but the first way we like meaningfully worked together was the Profitable Podcaster Mastermind. And I remember you having the realization that people, stylists, your new clients, were listening to your old podcast, and that's how they were finding you. And I was like, yeah, it's a sales asset. It exists because it is you doing really good work. And you were like, oh, this could work in like a really different way than I thought it could work. Yeah, and it was so exciting.
I was talking to styling clients. And so, like, what was happening as a result, and I'm sharing this because I think that we limit how we think about our own marketing and our own businesses. Like, what a business lesson. And Stacey and I then had the idea like, oh, we could repurpose some of those and I could like basically like critique them, which we'll probably do more like next season. But like, just generally speaking, like, because I was talking about styling in a specific way, it brought coaching clients to me that I wasn't even entertaining at the moment because I was showing my expertise. Now, that wasn't necessarily the thing that I think really did me a good job for my styling clients, because I honestly think I was giving away a lot of the important stuff. Like, I wasn't helping them make a decision. I was educating them. And that has been another key thing that Stacey has like coached me again and again about, because most of us came up in the world of educational content, give value, and there's different kinds of value, it turns out.
Well, and I think there are a lot of us, who spend, whether there's like a neurodiversity aspect or like just women energy, whatever it may be, we spend a lot of time trying to prove how smart we are. And we think the easiest way to do that is to come and I'll tell you I'm an expert. I'll show you I'm an expert. I will tell you everything I know about this thing that I know. And then you'll realize how smart I am and you will just come running to pound down my door. Except I've never actually told you where my door is.
1,000.
I've never actually told you how to find me or how to run here, or that I could help you, that this isn't just a place for you to feel smarter. And once upon a time, I think that was more effective or somewhat effective because there was, honest to God, less content. Like, there was just less of us doing it, but there's so much now. And so much of it is noise. And we also now have this pull to really prove our expertise because there is more content and there's more crappy content. There's more faux expertise. There's enough people who are taking this mentality of, well, I know just a little bit more than my customers, so I can broadcast this stuff that's often wrong, if not lacking some nuance. And so we double down on our expertise, right? We double down on educating. We double down on trying to prove how smart we are, when really the smartest thing we can do, the most supportive for our audience, is to prove our expertise in the process and not in the content. Meaning, I'm such an expert in what I do, I can tell you exactly how we're going to get you there. I can show you the roadmap. I don't need to tell you how all of that happens, because me telling you I know how to get us there is all the expertise your customer wants. They just need to know you know how to get there. The rest of it's overwhelm. The rest of it is either distraction, because they've convinced themselves now you've told them enough they can go do it, which is so rarely true. We've all know, because we've been on the receiving end of that content where you're like, oh, I learned on YouTube how to build a shed. It'll be fine. No, I still am not going to be able to build a shed. I don't care how many YouTube videos I watch. I told my husband is a diesel mechanic by trade, and I remember being like, I could just watch a video and I could do that. No, I couldn't. I definitely couldn't. But if we're broadcasting just the hows, it just makes the listener feel like, oh, well, I have enough information. I can figure this out. And we prolong their discomfort. We prolong their purchase time. We push off when they get to a point where they're like, yeah, okay, it's time for me to meaningfully make change. And I think one of the things your podcast does, and the reason it appeals to who it appeals to now, is because you're speaking a language they understand, and you're demonstrating the expertise of knowing how to build that business, of knowing how to deliver that business. One of the things I love that we did was we used that to sort of leverage driving traffic to the new show. So let's talk a little bit about the new show, because you're still in your first few months post-launch, but how has this process and launch been in comparison to the first one?
Well, it's 1 month. It's literally like a couple days more than a month. So what's wild is how, I just, at the time of this, we're recording this on May 14th, 2024, I have a very small Instagram. It's like under 1,000. And yet, and this is why I love the way Stacey approaches this. It's like the launch was the most low-key thing ever, which is very much my style for launching. I hate a launch. No, Stacey has this genius, absolutely genius belief that, and it really helped me with my first podcast too, was like the first 20 episodes are for you and are trash. No, in my specific case, it was a little bit different. I think we had talked about, because I did have a podcast before. I do know, I'm only talking to other personal stylists. I wasn't people know me in the industry. It wasn't like I was a new business owner, never podcasted. And I needed some nuance around my strategy and my plan, but I always thought I was using it for my business sales. I just wasn't doing it right. So that was handled. But I liked that about Stacey's approach. And I'm sharing that in case you're listening to this and you're like, oh, I have to have $1 million and I have to do this big launch and I have to, it's like, no, take her advice and do the 20 for yourself and be shitty at it.
We're totally allowed to swear here. It's good.
Okay. I was like, oh no.
We literally have a podcast episode coming out in a couple of weeks. Teaser guy, from after this releases. Actually, it might have come out already. But we're talking about the shitty 20 episode experiment.
Perfect.
So we'll all either have context already or you will soon of this.
If you don't know, search for it if you haven't. But she just has.
We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, it's my favorite thing, because I think that I bring that up because it's a very good. The fact that it wasn't this expectation, even as a more seasoned podcaster, that I was supposed to come out the gate I thought I was the first time with this big launch, and I had to get people rating the show beforehand. I mean, actually, in this show, I didn't even have to ask anyone. It was pretty well rated the first day it came out. So I couldn't believe it. I was begging people last time, and this time I forgot. I was away on a trip with my mother-in-law, sister's-in-law when it launched, and we're at the table, and they're like, "So what's new?" I'm like, oh, sorry, I'm on my phone. I just launched my podcast. They were like, you launched a podcast and you're away? I'm like, yeah, it was the most, I wasn't at my computer. I wasn't, hoping that I did ask for people to review it if they could, but it wasn't a big deal. With my first launch, I was so anxious about like, is this the right first episode? And did I say the right things? Are these the right 3 first episodes? And like, cause you launch it with a few, live. Mm-hmm. And it just was nothing like that. I was like, okay, well, this is the long game. And that is why having someone like Stacey on your team is so important, because you need the perspective of, if you're going to invest in a podcast, it is not the same as other investments. And it is, in fact, an investment, a well worthwhile one that will pay you back 1,000,000 times. And it's a freaking investment. So buckle up, because investments and relationships are connected. And I was thinking, like, I'm launching this to build relationships. And if I had already been able to generate 6 figures of revenue from April to April with less than 500 Instagram followers. So I knew this podcast did not need that many downloads or whatever. It needed the right people downloading it. And Stacey was behind that 100%, just sort of encouraging that instinct I had. And so when that happens, you and I, as the people doing the podcast, can focus on what matters, which is making sure that you're building a relationship with people that are there, not on a fancy launch, because nobody cares about your launch. They only care about themselves. So like, we're not a media company. We're a business that's using this as a communication tool. Fancy launches are absolutely a waste of time. And I think maybe Stacey believes it's different. Maybe that was just like she was going with my style at the time. But I think it's trash.
No, I think for me, what's dangerous about a fancy launch, what's dangerous about putting that much energy in it, is I think it's one of the leading causes of pod fade, honestly, because it burns you out. And so if you're somebody who is anxious or stressed out about like sort of doing it right, I mean, I've been podcasting for 640 some episodes at this point. Do you think anybody listens to that first episode? No! Doesn't matter if it's shitty now. Right. And frankly, it didn't matter then, because not a whole lot of people are listening at the beginning. It's about being able to find your legs. And you came in ready to talk to the right people instead of talking to everyone. And that allowed us to really quickly build stuff that made sense. We didn't have to spend a lot of time figuring out who that right audience is. Because that's oftentimes part of that first 20 shitty episodes, is sort of feeling into who specifically you're talking to. So the fact that you came in with established content that worked, even if it wasn't on a podcast, for you was on Instagram. You had been really building that audience, building those relationships, been in those conversations. So your 20 episodes didn't need to be 20 episodes. You'd bought some behind the mic experience with the first show. You had bought some talking to your audience and understanding their needs, time in the Instagram stuff. And so you were able to come in. Yes, I'm great. Absolutely. But you were ready to step into the kind of show you needed. And I think that's the work that can really benefit you the most before launching a show, is spend some time talking to your people. Get out of this is what I think they need, this is what I think they want to hear, and just go be in conversation with them. I think one of the greatest things you did pre-launch was your roundtable series, where you had people come in and you had conversations and you talked through this information with them, because you got immediate feedback about what was hitting and wasn't hitting. And those sound bites and those little pieces of language that we end up using now in the podcast came from trying that on in Instagram stories, came from doing that in the roundtable, and really being in conversation with your clients. I think that's a powerful tool that is wildly underutilized. And it's a much better time, like use of your time, than being stressed out about crafting the perfect first episode and spending a gazillion dollars in launch ads that are going to drive you to what will, big picture, like a year from now, 2 years from now, be your least effective episodes, because you will just continue to get better. And one of the things, you said it, and I hammer this drum a lot. This is a long game. In the big picture, your first 20 episodes will not matter. A year from now, very few people are going to be going back that far. Do you know you want a podcast for at least a year? Well, then let's not spend too much time worried about this.
But I think your point to people that are listening and maybe even are advanced business owners is like, even if you're not, Even if you're just like, okay, I know I want this podcast, because I'm sure you get people that come to you and are like, but I know this is what I want. I want to do my first 20 shitty episodes with you. And it's like, okay.
Sometimes.
Yeah. And that's fine. And if you're going to do that, I think really the highest and best piece of recommendation that Stacey's giving and I can give as a business consultant is make sure that wherever you're driving people to from social media, like whether it's Instagram in my case or your blog or whatever, make sure that your messaging is already working there for free. And then you can speed up the 20 shitty episodes to some degree. Like you're still going to need to be the skill of podcasting still needs to happen. And the content of the podcast could be better faster. And that was for me, like I was happy to make the investment and I needed to know, and it's not just with my podcast. I don't even have a website yet. Why? Because I was trying to make sure that everything I was saying and everyone I was talking to and the process that I was developing one-on-one was working. I was iterating so that when I do invest in a podcast or I do invest in a, website or whatever, or a copywriter, it may not be perfect and it may not be forever, but it's a hell of a lot better as a sales asset that I'm putting my money in. I've been selling off a PDF for a year. And honestly, there's part of me that wouldn't even have a website right now if I didn't have a podcast to put on it. Like that is how useless these things are if you don't know. And we make it so hard. Like you do not need, what you need to know is how to talk to people that want your help, how to build a relationship in a way that feels good for both sides, and then make investments. And that will get you faster through that 21st shitty episodes if you're someone that wants to do that. Just piece of advice. Like
absolutely. Honestly, I'd take it a step further. I'd say if you can't close a sales call consistently, I'm not saying you've got to have 100% batting average. Like 100%. Nobody does, right? Like we're all taking baseball numbers here. As long as you're succeeding like 3 or 4 times out of 10, you're fine. Like you're hitting pretty well. But if you're finding that you are hitting maybe 1 out of every 10 sales calls that you're closing,
right,
it's not time to drive more traffic to the sales calls. It's time to figure out what's wrong with your offer. And I think so often our instinct is if we just get more people, we talk about this a lot with podcasts, like, oh, I need the show to grow. It's not, we mostly work with established podcasters. We mostly work with people who have been doing this 50, 100 episodes. And oftentimes I'll sit down with somebody on a sales call and they'll be like, I've been doing this for a while. It's fine. I want to keep doing exactly what it's doing. I just need you to help me grow it. And I go, cool. So are you seeing a lot of purchases from the show? Like people are like, no, my customers never talk about it. In fact, a lot of my clients don't even know I have a podcast. Then it is not time to grow your show.
Don't waste your money. And sorry, because there is all that other money.
You have an absolute disconnect here. And so I love your advice about like using Instagram, using social media, using some kind of platform. DIY your own show if you want to start doing it. Like there are a lot of good options to do your first 20 episodes. This is actually a really popular way to use our podcast strategy intensive is we'll build that plan and then you go DIY your show and just get it up and do it dirty and it's fine. And that is so informative. Oftentimes we'll have clients who do that intensive, who do those shitty 20 episodes and then come back and they're like, cool, now I'm actually ready to step into this because I learned so much about, and now I'm getting people who are coming to my sales call and doing the thing I so often talk about, which is regurgitate stuff from the podcast to me on a sales call, which is the most fun. You've gotten the joy of this? Yeah. I know.
Yes, I have got it in DMs. I've got it on sales calls. I have, I've done, for my last podcast, I did an intensive with Stacey towards the end of my podcast because then when COVID hit, I had stopped. And my podcast actually started to do really well. That's actually when I did that intensive. Because now that I think back, that is why over COVID, I started getting stylists coming to me, asking me to coach them, even though it was not public knowledge that I did that. So it was a direct result of that. Then when Stacey did the mastermind, I knew I was thinking about this, but I wasn't quite ready yet. Like I just wanted to think about how I would even think about the show so that I could start practicing. That's another thing I highly recommend. Even if you're not ready, do the podcast and you want to do like a group thing. It's so helpful. I learned so much from like every aspect of it. And I knew I was not going to DIY. Like I knew I wasn't going to do it myself. And I still used it because I still used ideas I got on there on my social media. And another side note I just want to add, if you are thinking, how do I do this? Or you are anxious in like a visibility sense about having a podcast, even though I wasn't anxious about it, I was thinking like, okay, I did the roundtable, which were free public calls on specific topics to start to use to like practice my messaging and hear what people think. It was also a placeholder until we did launch the podcast. So I was always planning. It was just like I needed something in the interim. So I did that. And then I had a private, and by private, I don't even mean like a fancy one. I mean, I did a recording on Zoom that I put in a Google folder and I sent to my established clients as a nurture mechanism to also practice what they would want and understand what they would respond to once they had worked with me. And so I was practicing this idea because I'm obsessed with not being a perfectionist after years of being like that, which is why I will do it shitty the first time over and over again because it makes you more money and it gives you more impact. I don't care what anyone tells me. I have done it.
It makes it so much faster.
I have done it the hardest ways possible. And like, that's what my thing is, like, just do it. And so if you are that person and you are nervous or you're anxious, do what I did. Like, do a little quote private podcast. Don't even invest in a private podcast, but do it on Zoom, stick it in a Google folder, practice, send it to the people that already love you, are your fans. See, you're going to get responses. Tell them to DM you voice notes. Let them interact so that when you do launch a podcast and you do make the investment, you feel it. Like you're all in and you're excited because it would be squandering Stacey's strategy genius for you to do those things and then do nothing with it.
And the mastermind was a lot of how you started with that private stuff for the existing clients.
Yeah.
That a lot of what we did in there actually ended up in that space and ended up in our first strategy call. We pulled a lot of your notes from the mastermind into that first quarterly strategy call.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is like, and this is also just from like a business perspective. We often think that the people that are your like one-to-one are not your group program people or they're not your, and like, that's just a bunch of bullshit. If you are selling too many things that don't make sense for your audience, like, yeah. So streamline it because then when you can kind of like every step of doing Stacey's process, now I'm obviously the most in, like has made me better. It wasn't like, it was like me getting reps in. And now I have my reps, so I know how this should work. So when I hand it over, I am in, like, it's a partnership. It's not like, well, I don't know, Stacey, go figure out my business. Like, that's not your job. It's never a marketing agency, company, podcast, whatever. It's not their job. It's your job to like know how your business works so you can help them help your business. And so that's what the reps were for me. It was like, how can I help this partnership be better?
I love that. And it's interesting because we've seen that a couple of times with people who have joined us for the mastermind where it was them feeling into either their first podcast, but honestly, I'm thinking we've got two people, you and one other person I could think of that came in and had podcasted before.
Yeah.
And you started a new show and the other one relaunched. We relaunched their show. But it is, the group program specifically is such a nice way to sort of be in the room with your podcast again. It's almost like couples therapy for you and your podcast. It's more like, okay, why wasn't this working before? Like where do we need to bridge the gap? So that we can clear things up.
Tagline. I think that should be the tagline. Oh my God, I love it. Especially because you do talk to a fair. I think there's this idea that like if you are an established podcaster, like that kind of thing maybe isn't for you, but actually it's absolutely for you because and we've talked about this, Stacey. I know you've had this experience. So many people I know have come to you and have come to me in a different context where they're like, oh, I had someone else doing my show, or I had someone else doing my marketing in my case. It's like what I see. And they're like, I guess it works. Can you just do more of the same as you said? And then when you dig in, it didn't work. It just got out the door. And working means it's converting. Working means you're getting one. Working means people are at least telling you, oh, this really hit. Or it did, even if they say it sucked, at least they're listening. Like they're having a reaction. And I think,
or they're having no reaction, which is also data.
Yeah. But most people that come to us as the like, well, just tell me it from me. It's like, tell me what to say. And for you, it's like, well, let's just stick on.
It's often still tell me what to say.
Yeah. It's just a different version. Like I want you to be the person that gets it out the door now, not those people. Right. And it's like, I get why you think that that's how this works, but you going through like the mastermind was really helpful because when you don't understand your relationship to your marketing in your podcast, you muddle the relationship with your buyer. And I did not see that. I was willing to believe what Stacey said, but I didn't see my own flavor of BS that I was doing until I was in there and like practicing the things in the mastermind and listening to other people. Like so useful.
That's one of my favorite things about the mastermind. It's also why it's never more than 5 people in a cohort is because I want you to really be able to hear each other, for lack of a better way to phrase this, verbally process and like, talk through a question. We have that program structured. So every other call is literally consulting. You come in with your questions regarding what we talked about in the workshop, and we talk through what I taught you. Because I think so many of these programs, specifically in the podcasting space, are like, let me just give you the boxes to check technically.
Yeah.
And here's 50 content ideas. Go have a show. And there is that relationship. There is that blending that has to happen.
And to be fair, you do give people the technical, like, here's how you would do it if you do it. So I could have left there and done it on my own. I just didn't have the capacity because business where the business was. If I was starting out newer, if I didn't have 15 years of experience, if I couldn't have launched this business the way that I could because of my prior, like that is a privilege of having had a 14-year career in a field and then going and consulting in it, which I highly recommend. Much easier way to run a business than my last foray. But you have to be a beginner at some point, and I'm still a beginner in different ways, just new things. And so what I thought about when you were saying that is that every step of the way, whether it was when I just did the intensive and I kind of started to steer the ship of my old podcast around and started to think about it differently and just approach it differently, whether it was that doing the group program and the mastermind being like, okay, wait, what is my relationship to this? How do I want to show up? Where do I want to practice? And just having this freedom in my mind of knowing if I did want to do something myself, I did have the technical, like you told me what to do. Mm-hmm. So I just didn't want to, but like I could. And then at every level there was freedom. And then obviously at the highest level, like I just speak into a microphone and you guys make it sound great. So like, excellent. And I get the strategy. So I know what to say when I get in that microphone. And I have someone else to bounce the idea off of. I have someone else to say like, does this sound bananas or not? Which is so important and like literally so valuable. Like I think
the bananas check is critical. Like I'll ask my team, do I sound crazy? This doesn't sound crazy, right? It makes sense.
Because you're so close to it. And like, and also there's also the thing of like, using it as kind of like a public sales tool. Mm-hmm. Having sales skills is just something I'm learning a lot more about. Like it's kind of like, it's a skill. And this is a skill. And podcasting is in this way, in this manner, is learning sales skills. And that takes practice. And it's public practice, which is not for the faint of heart. Like,
well, and for me, I love the podcast and I love that you're talking about it this way. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but for me, you're recording a podcast is me putting in the reps on my sales activity. Mm-hmm. It's me practicing making the ask. It's me practicing a call to action. And that can't stop because we all know what happens when I have run marathons. I could not go run a marathon tomorrow. You want to know why? I haven't trained in literal years. Right? Yeah. And so like, even though it's a skill we can lose. And so having this element in my business is something that allows me and keeps me accountable to doing those reps, practicing those sales skills, making the ask, showing up in my offer, talking about what I do. And so if that's something that you're uncomfortable with, start practicing because it's literally the only way you get comfortable. It's funny. We've got a client who who just started working with us at the beginning of this year, and they have a guest-driven show. They've done 100+ episodes of a guest-driven show, and we started talking about solo episodes, which is why we've talked about solo episodes on the podcast so much this last couple of months because this came up with a couple of clients, and we were talking through the discomfort of having to show up solo and then sell yourself. And obviously not in like a ShamWow way, which by the way, super just aged myself. Do they even still have ShamWows? Second of all,
so good. I'm going to look it
up. But like in a real meaningful in conversation kind of way, which by the way, has made it so much easier for me to do that in networking conversations. In a 50, that 60-second pitch you do at the top of a networking event. You know how much easier that is for podcasters who use their show to strategically sell because this is a tool. It is a mechanism to practice those sales skills. And yes, that's not always super comfy, which is one of the reasons I love supporting our clients the way we do. Is we talk about hold your hair episodes on the show all the time, where there's an episode where you're like, that one was scary, and I'm like, I promise it was good and it will be okay, and I'm here. We're gonna be all right. But also like it becomes so habitual when you make space for it and when you come at it going, this is what I'm selling. I know what this episode is for. I know who it's for. I know its purpose in my business. It makes it so much easier to do the maybe uncomfortable thing of making the offer, of practicing that sales skill. And so you put in those reps when you have content that is meant to be a part of your sales team that you just can't get another way without being on the phone with somebody every week or every other day or whatever it is.
And it's a one-to-many conversation. So it's like the most efficient sales conversation. And
leveraged.
It's a long game. I just want to remind people who might be panicking. Like you're doing sales through a relationship. And that's the thing, is that like you have to rethink it. And people that tend to hide behind, I never hid behind guest episodes, but I didn't really understand why I was doing them. I was just like, oh, this is going to make me, like, I had a big thing around, to be honestly, I thought that guest was like a good way to like get more reach with your show. And
it's because that's what you were told. It is what people are sold.
Maybe, but like, again, I still have a pretty small, incredibly niched audience. I mean, it doesn't even bother me anymore because like I am now so niched, I'm like virtually, like I can't, this is like
it's
one of the only podcasts I'll take. Like nobody wants, like, so one of the things that I've learned is like, I could get guests on my show to like, what, I don't know what, but, and they maybe would be helpful to my clients, but honestly, that's probably more helpful in like a private course where I'm doing an interview and getting their questions asked. Like they don't just want a random interview. They want to get their questions asked from an expert. So why would I waste your time? And this was another thing, the 20 shitty episodes and like, why do you even have guests on your show to begin with, were the two things. When I first met Stacey, we met through a mastermind that we were in for a year. Like it just rearranged my brain. Like this is what it means to strategically look at your business. Like people don't even know what that means. And like this, I'm just being clear. This is what it means. I had not seen it. So I'm telling you to look out. There's so much BS in the online space, particularly with business coaches and consultants. And I'm particularly sensitive to it since now I'm in that seat and have invested so much money. And this is the kind of thing that actually makes a difference. Why are you having a guest on? Oh, it's not to help the same goal, which is the listener getting further away or closer to a buying decision with this guest? Well, guess what? If it's some random person that just is an expert, also a business owner, you're like, then stop. Because if you need that to hide, that tells me so much about your business and the self-development that you need to get. So let's just rip the Band-Aid off. And if you need to have guests, at least have guests that are your clients. Like, and those have been incredibly great sales assets, I would just like to add. Like, the work that this podcast is doing for me is bananas. I have two great examples of things that, like, when Stacey says, like, assets, that's another thing. Like, that really woke up my brain. I was like, I could be working smarter, not harder. And so, like, another reason why I want to have someone produce this, because this is going to be my sales person when I'm sleeping. So please polish it up as best. Doesn't mean it's perfect because nobody else knows what that should look like perfect. Only you do. But let's get it as good as possible, right? And so two things that happened recently is, one, I have a client or had a potential client trying to decide between two of my highest touch or a group program. That's really all I have. And they went to the people on the podcast. Like, no one's like, can I get a referral from a client? Like, that's another thing I can't stand because, like, people are busy. Nobody, like, you're a grown-up, make your own decision. Like, what questions do you have for me? Like, You don't need, and I got this as a stylist too. Like, what are they going to tell you that, like, is going to be any different? But it's helped with that. Like, I don't have to give names of people and bother them. And they can DM the person, like, if they want to, because in my case, they're other business owners, and they can ask. And it's worked out well. The other one is I had somebody find me through somebody else and say, oh, like, I've invested in other coaches, I've invested in consultants, and I never really finished, and blah, blah, blah. Well, don't you know, I had a podcast episode on it. And I was like, oh my gosh, here. And like the excitement I had to send that link, I was like, Stacey,
it makes me so happy.
It's such a cool feeling. And she was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is exactly what I needed. Like, I did a one-to-many sales presentation basically in that podcast. And now it's still helping me sell one-on-one. And people feel so taken care of. What? This is the best investment in my career. This is bananas.
Well, and what I love about those episodes that you send, I'm just gonna, because I have to, two things. The episodes that you have to send, anytime I have to send an episode a second time, I actually create a saved response in Instagram so that I can just go in and send that. The thing I did before that you can also do is if you have an Apple phone, an iPhone, you can create a shortcut that will pull up, autocorrect a bunch of text. And so you can put in for one I've got is when I sold a membership, I had OB price. So OB objection, and their objection was the price. And so when I typed in OB price to my iPhone, a bunch of text would come up that included a podcast episode talking about the value of the investment of joining that program when it existed. And so I could send an episode really quickly without every time having to type it up. I now have them saved as Instagram responses because I find it to be more effective than trying to remember what code I made up for it in my keyboard of my phone. And I've more than once had to just go into the settings and been like, which one did I write? Anyway, so either way, but that's a really good thing. The other piece of this, though, is those are the ones that I put a little note around and I include them in sales sequences in my email. So common objections, these things that are coming up all the time, these case study episodes with clients, those go in email funnels because oftentimes we can present them to somebody before they even realize they have the question. And now how much more of an expert, going back to what we were talking about demonstrating our expertise through understanding where they are throughout the sales process. Because if you can identify my problem before I can identify my problem, you get my problem and you're my solution. Whereas if you're in constant, to use a word you used earlier, reaction mode, where it's like, oh, that's your question. Let me run and put something together and here you go. Instead of going, oh yeah, here you go. You know how to take care of me. I'm in. I'm all the way in. And that's true for all of us because our capacity gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And so it's our jobs to be ahead of their questions. And when you can pull these assets out of your back pocket, when you can grab these and send them right away and just walk them through now a 20-minute, what feels like you talking to them voice note instead of a 3-line message in Instagram, look at the impact. Look at the relationship difference of what you're building.
1,000%. And I think that, yes, there are a lot of podcasts. People are like, oh, there's so many podcasts out there. But but not every even, first of all, not every podcast is for business. Some of them are their own businesses and people don't get that. And then another thing is a podcast for your business, similar to social media for your business, is not the same thing as just being popular or have people liking you. It's just not the same. And of course you want them to, but I don't need them to like me. I need them to trust me and respect me. That is a different vibe. And that what Stacey just said is really interesting because as she was saying it, I was like, this is how looking at your strategy and looking at the way she sits down with you quarterly and or does it in the one-off or does it in the mastermind. This is how you start, as anxious as you can be about that visibility piece from this is how you become an expert and a leader. And again, it's the reps that we keep talking about and I think Stacey and I are talking about it a lot today, just for full transparency, because we've been in a lot of rooms in the online space and it's very much still we're selling this idea that take your laptop and go sell by the pool. Sure, yeah. And you still got to do your reps. I don't care where you do them. That is the cost of admission to have the life where you can sit by the pool, because you can sit by the pool with no clients or you can sit by the pool with clients. I personally would rather do it with clients and money in my bank account. So let's not screw around here with this. So when she gives you a strategy, however you get to her in that strategy, you can now focus on implementing the strategy instead of worrying about yourself. And that is so important. It's we think, you're not going to be the same kind of nervous if you have somebody that's telling you this is the steps in order to make this an asset that sells for you. Well, now I don't need to think about myself. I just need to think about what is the asset. And if it's not perfect, you re-record it another time. You do it next. Stacey, how many of the same episode flavors have you done in your 600?
Bazillions. I say this all the time. We are all saying the same 3 to 5 things. I have done 600 episodes that cover 8 things total. And that's because we've rebranded in there. We've covered other things, you know. But like literally, like if you look at, like I say a lot of the same stuff to you guys on the show. Like a lot. Because we all need to hear it in different ways, different times, different mediums. Like it's called having a brand. It's called having an expertise. It's very specific. The thing I love about what you're talking about with the visibility thing is when you can take out the what do I say and the why am I saying this, you'll be amazed at how much easier it is for you to show up.
So much of visibility fear, as somebody that has had to work through this on many levels for decades, is knowing the difference between your own, you know, in my case, there was a specific thing that happened that created the fear. But I think it's just like so much of it is like we fear being judged, but like if you have somebody, whether it's if you have somebody by your side like Stacey or a business coach or something to be like, which she is a business coach technically, but she doesn't like to say that, so I'm just gonna put it out there.
What did I tell you about telling people that?
let's not create controversy, but kind of let's the drama. But like all of that to say, like when you have that, one of the things people don't realize they're paying for, and I wish they did, is that you are getting outside of yourself. It's helping you see the problem differently. And it's helping you honestly be a leader. And you can't be a leader and be stuck in your own like mental anguish over what people are going to think of you. You can have those moments to yourself, but in the moment,
all do.
100%. But like, it can't be the thing that keeps you from, that can be a moment because you're a human, but it can't be all the moments. And what hiring somebody that can help you kind of see this in a systematic way does is it focuses your brain so it gets you off of you and gets you on them. And then you can have the panic later. But that doesn't mean that podcast episode isn't impactful and important in helping people and a sales asset. But save the freak out for after so you at least get it done. Like,
absolutely. And this is what I talk about hold your hair episodes. Like we have clients who record episodes that are not super comfy. And then they're like, I'm going to need you to tell me if I sounded cuckoo bananas. And I need you to tell me the most common one is, did that even make sense? Yeah. Like, did I just sort of blabber on in the general direction of what we were talking about? Or is this like concise? And honestly, every single time it's better than we think it is for like someone outside of us. This is great. Honestly, the clients who come to me and they're freaked out about like an episode or kind of like we have one of these hold your hair moments, they're always the best ones. They're always the ones where I'm like, this is the best episode you've ever done. Could you do 6 more of these? And they're like, no, I can't. I had to record it 3 times. You hear it?
It's usually the vulnerable ones. And those are the ones that actually I have found done well. So like I just came out with 2 episodes that, I mean, to anybody on the outside would be like, that's not vulnerable. They're like, but I was nervous because I was coming out on take in the industry that was unusual. And I was afraid it would alienate people that I even respect. And what I found was the absolute opposite happened. Not only did it create an immense, I would say even more loyal following, actually, because it was original and not to be like, oh, I'm so smart, but like I just basically took something I saw and named it, which felt a little bit, it just felt very like, who am I to like name this thing? Like, I don't, like I was taking authority, but like somebody needed to say it so that people could do business better in the styling industry. And when I did it, I thought, oh God, some people are going to be like, I can't, like, she's, judging me and what's wild is how many people identified as the one that I thought they would think I was saying something bad about. And what they said was, you normalize this and now I understand. And that feeling of being like, there's room here for everybody. We got to kind of understand who we are and where we are in the space to be successful. I know that probably doesn't sound like a big deal from the outside, but if you're the only one saying it and you don't think other people are going to resonate, it's scary. And what I have found with both podcasts is those are the episodes that people remember. And those are the ones that keep getting traction. So you're only nervous in the beginning, but once you see that, it reinforces that you were nervous because you were on to something, I think.
I always make sure I go and message clients who have those kind of episodes on the day they release or a couple of days after they release. And I go, so how's the feedback? Because the response is almost always, it's been so good. I've had so many people in my inbox or so many people in my DMs. Or I had one recently where they're like, I booked 3 sales calls today. And I was like, the episode we were afraid of.
Well,
What do you know?
Well, I think too, it's because like it's so funny that we're talking about this because it's making me think so many things. But what's so interesting is that we, sometimes we think that our nervousness is because something has gone wrong, but it's actually an indication that it's like excitement, but we've not learned to delineate the two things. And this will happen a lot in podcasting and marketing, I'm learning.
It's true. I remind myself regularly that anxiety is, or no, what is the phrase?
Anxiety is excitement.
Anxiety is excitement that can't breathe.
That's what it is.
That's what it is. And so whenever I'm feeling that, now granted, I have actual anxiety. So sometimes we do have to manage the medical side of it. But honestly, the anxieties feel different. And I have figured that out. And that's huge for you to recognize in yourself. And it's something that took me a really long time. And I still hate to do in the moment where I go, wait, let's categorize this. But oftentimes it's just like, oh, let me take a couple deep breaths and just do it. Because the moment it's over, I'm going to be stoked.
Yeah.
The moment it gets released, the moment I get feedback, for a lot of my clients, it's from the moment after I hear it and I go, no, that was great. And so like, whew, and they can sort of take that breath and be like, oh, now I can shift into just being stoked about this because I know it's going to be good. I love that. I want to thank you for sharing all of this with us today. I have taken up lots of your time. And so as we wrap up now, can you tell us a little bit about what's going on? What's next for your show? If you've got anything you want to share with the audience.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm just going to keep on keeping on and having Stacey be my fearless guide and strategic genius. But I'm using the show a little bit differently. I was mostly doing one-to-one and I'm moving to a different business model that's one-to-many. I got a membership coming up. I got a group program. And then, the podcast will sort of go according to those sales cycles, which will be interesting. I've never really done that before because I was so heavily in one-to-one in both my businesses. So I'm excited to think about that and really think about making sales assets, education assets, and just, helping people make decisions and continuing.
And hearing me say to you a bazillion times, when you sell one thing, you sell everything.
100%. Another Stacey genius. I'm going to start making t-shirts with all these phrases on them.
We're just going to we'll have cards, little note cards.
Stacey's. I'm telling you, if just as to end the wrap the episode, thank you for having me. And if you are listening to this, there are very few people, and I've been on a lot of podcasts in my career, that I can, without hesitation, excitedly, and I would pay twice what I pay Stacey for what she does. She is so smart. And if you just do an intensive because you're not ready for the full thing, it will not just be good for your podcast. It will be good for your business. And obviously those two things are connected, but just how you think about your business. So please, if you've been listening to this podcast for multiple seasons, just take action. It will change your life because I've done it both ways and I do not recommend the other one. So thank you for having me. I love you.
I love you too. Thank you for being here. I feel like Nicole did such a beautiful job wrapping this episode up that I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but I wanted to point out a couple of things. I wanted to point out how imperative, no matter how she got there, the strategic work we did together, whether that was in the intensive, whether that was in the Profitable Podcaster Mastermind, or even in our quarterly calls now as part of her production contract, that stepping out, that getting perspective from someone other, and the accountability of knowing that that was what was going to happen has all played a part in different ways, depending on the way she worked with us. And I want you to look at, what does support for you look like right now? Not forever, not the only thing I'll ever get, but right now, what kind of support do you need? And I want to invite you to go get it, to look for it, to reach out. If that's booking an intensive with me, if that's getting on the wait list for the Profitable Podcaster Mastermind, if that's hiring someone else, if that's starting to get more in depth with your offer, or with some of the other things we talked about today, that are ideally lined up before you get too deep in this work. Do that. Take action. Don't continue to sit in the what is possible for me if I did that, and start finding out by just putting one imperfect foot in front of the other. I think that's probably the biggest takeaway I'd love for you to have from this episode. And of course, I'd love to sit down and talk to you about what that work with me would look like. So head on over to uncommonlymore.com and explore whatever way speaks to you first. A great option is that 30-minute call that you get when you sign up for an intensive. There's absolutely no obligation there, but it's a really good way for you and I to have a conversation so that I can help you decide what might be the right path right now. All right? I'll see you over there and we'll talk soon. Thanks. Thanks so much for listening to the show. Remember that content consumption does not make changes. So commit to doing something from today's episode. Maybe it's taking action on what we talked about. Maybe it's reaching out to me and learning more about podcast strategy intensives or what podcast production looks like with our team. All of that is over at uncommonlymore.com. And if you haven't yet signed up for the podcast newsroom, I want to remind you that is a great next step. If you're not really sure what comes next, hang out over there. Get those exclusive private episodes. That's over at podcastnewsroom.com. And the last favor I will ask, because social proof is endlessly important for sure, is to leave a rating or review for this show. If you go to ratethispodcast.com/more, that's the easiest way to do it. But I would love to hear what you thought of the show, what you think of the show, and if the show has been helpful for you. I can't wait to chat with you. So this is just the start of the conversation. Reach out so we can keep it going. Talk soon.